This is a project on troubleshooting and diagnostics of a fuel system on a CAT 3126B, so a Safari 2000. It'll be the same on probably any coach. I had the unfortunate experience of having made a change to something unrelated, which was on the oil centrifuge system that I added. So I did some welding. When I went to start the coach, it would not start. So I thought I damaged something in the electrical. After a lot of troubleshooting, I found out that that was fine. But what I didn't realize was that I'd been told the final filter to the engine had been changed and it was new, etc. I'd only put 4,000 miles on the coach. It turned out that was totally plugged. So that caused a lot of problems and time. Once I put the new filter on, which is a CAT filter, that's a yellow filter you can see, it still would not start. So I put a clear line in from the output of the fuel system to the input of the first stage of the filter, which is that goldenrod filter, and that's what you see here. So you can see it starting up and running, and it used to run just fine, and now it would, nothing looked any different, but now what happened, it would run, it would falter, and then die, and that's what you can hear. What I determined was that by adding the goldenrod filter, that worked like almost like a hypodermic syringe. The surface volume of the vacuum pulling on that rake core multiplied the vacuum through the fuel line. And what it was doing now was sucking a lot of air through cracks in the line because it had deteriorated. So this wasn't just supposition, this was verified, and you'll see that here. Once, and how I determined that was to simply remove the rake core now entirely from the system. So in that previous video you could see, or this video, you can see air coming in, you can see the bubbles being entrapped. That's not because it's falling into the tube, that's because it's being pulled and mixed with the fuel as it's coming into the fuel system, which is obviously through the cracks. Now there's some misinformation that this system is a gravity-fed system. There is no gravity at all in this system. The tank is not high enough to produce any gravity effect. The line is not a siphoning line, it's a vacuum line, and that does not work that way. It works entirely on vacuum from the first stage of the fuel pump in the engine, which then pressurizes it and puts it out through the final filter system. So that's why you're seeing air in that line. The vacuum is pulling it in. So what I did was remove the goldenrod system, which is that gold bowl there, and just put in the clear line straight to the fuel system. It ran just fine. It ran as it always did. It ran normally, but I could see a great deal of air in the line. The line would be half full of air with foam and bubbles at the bottom. The next thing you see is when I changed the fuel line out. And after I changed the fuel line, I also put a check valve into the system after the shutoff valve. And I talked to Bill Edwards, he recommended a shutoff valve. I put that in, but I added the check valve because it was proving impossible to get the air out of the system. If you look on the left-hand side of the filter, the white filter there, you can see a T connection and a plug. So I was able to hook up a pump on that, a vacuum pump, and pull fuel from the tank through that hole there and pull in and get the thing started with no problem whatsoever. However, I did not have a pump that displaced air and with fuel. It just pulled fuel. So there was no air escape on that pump that I used. Therefore, I could not get all of the air out of the system. So the check valve was to prevent the air from flowing back to the tank, and that worked. So it would run, that line would be solid with fuel, but there's still about a quarter of the goldenrod system had air in it. Then what I did was I hooked it up again and pumped it, and I could see air going into the system. I could not understand where that would come from. And then I realized that it was being pulled from the return valve line through the head on the fuel system that goes back, returns the excess fuel to the tank. So I went and put a check valve in there, and that's that silver thing that you can see. That's a cheap one. I'm going to replace it with one that's the same as at the front of the fuel system. You want something that's industrial grade. Don't buy the stuff off of eBay. It's got little rubber valves in there, which this has. I just had this as a spare, so I put it in to test this, and it made a dramatic change in the system. The engine started better and it ran smoother. So at the back of the head on the 3126 at least, there is a fuel regulator. The regulation is done by the size of the orifice that's drilled in the regulator. It's a right angle device, and in there is a check valve. My belief is that check valve had failed. So by putting one in series with it, that then performed the operation it's supposed to do, which is prevent air coming back from the tank into the system through the return. And that did work. I could pull and reduce the amount of air in the system. I could not get rid of it all entirely. Now, I think it's over $100 or $150 for that little check valve. I don't know. I'll take it apart maybe sometime and see if I can clean and fix it. For now, I'll just put a high-quality industrial one in there, about $8. They're not very much money if you look for them. But don't buy it on eBay through some offshore system. You don't want to mess around with this for the fuel system. So once that was installed, it all ran correctly as it was supposed to run. Now, what doesn't work on here properly is that you can see that there's still air in the golden one. There should be zero air in the system. So if you look carefully on the cat filter base, there is a plate there. Normally these filters for over-the-road trucks have a hand pump, and what that does is it pulls and displaces air for fuel. It will bleed the system. That's what it's for. They don't put them on these coaches, maybe because they can't fit them in properly, but anyway, I've ordered one. I'll install it, change the bracketing system and the design, and I'll do a project on that when it's done. There are offshore, actually good quality ones that you can buy for that. The cat one is like $800. It's expensive. So there it is. I'll go through the next part of it and show you how the fuel lines are put in. That wasn't difficult, but it wasn't a small task either. So the fuel lines had definitely deteriorated. It was proved by these tests that I've done here. You'll notice too, one thing that's very important is now when it's running, the fuel vacuum is 4 pounds, not 0, but 4. And it runs smooth, it starts evenly. So I think a lot of coaches have fuel in their systems, or air in their fuel line systems, because there's no way really to get it out without a proper purging system, and we don't have that on these coaches. But it should be done. Okay, thank you.